Good afternoon, my friends, and welcome to this special presentation of Cowboy State Politics. As all of you are aware, I took a little trip to Jackson earlier this week, basically to keep my eyes on the Redcoats and make sure they didn't lie too much. Now, of course, nothing can stop a Redcoat Wyoming Caucus member from lying. That would be impossible. Unfortunately, I was unable to record the meeting I attended, and basically what happened is a group in Jackson invited 2 members of the Wyoming Caucus and 2 members of the Freedom Caucus to give a little spiel to a political group there in Jackson. So, it was Poison Barry Crago and Drag Show Clark Stith that were representing the Wyoming Caucus, and then Representative John Baer and Majority Floor Leader Chip Nyman for the Freedom Caucus. Even though I was unable to record the event, I'm pretty good at taking notes, and during the Wyoming Caucus Redcoat portion of the event, Barry Crago said pretty much that policy-wise, there's no difference between the Wyoming Caucus and the Freedom Caucus. They agree on most things. And then he gave a list of the things that they agree on: abortion, guns and the Second Amendment, school choice, lower taxes, local control, and smaller government. Yeah. If you believe any of that stuff, I've got some beachfront property down around Guernsey that I'd like to tell you about. Anyhow, this morning on the morning show, Joey Correnti and I went through their list and explained why none of that is true, and there's evidence to back it up. Shortly after this episode is published, I'll start working on posting all of that evidence to cowboystatepolitics.com. I should have it done early this afternoon. And it's no more complicated than taking screenshots off of wyoledge.gov. All of the evidence to dispute their claims is available on our state legislative website. You just have to know where to look. So here is our discussion from this morning.
And it is a rainy and cool Tuesday morning here at the Independence Network morning show coming your way. Jailbird Joey at the helm on the controls, almost like I'm trying not to crash into a giant bridge in a container ship. We might talk about that a little later. And lots of things to talk about this morning with my good friend David Iverson here with me. He's back in the studio today after a little bit of a trip up to the northwest corner of the state of Wyoming. And I'm kind of flying blind here. I've gotten a couple notes on what David experienced over the last couple days, but he's going to be bringing us some details of a meeting up in Teton County that I wasn't present at and don't know a whole lot about. So we're going to run the show a little different today. David's just going to kind of roll through what happened up there in Teton County, and I'm going to chime in and try to keep up and see what we can do with some of this information. So how you doing this morning, David?
I am so happy to be out of the People's Republic of Jackson. That is a completely different world, my friend. It's I enjoy going there just because I have some friends there that I don't get to see very often, but it is a completely different world. I mean, just 180 degrees from anything else in the state of Wyoming. It's one of the comments I heard. I was getting text messages the whole time because I was trying to keep people updated. I'm on a trip. It's a 6.5 hour drive from the Cowboy State Politics Northern Command. I guess it's Central Command now. So you get bored. So I'd stop for a little bit, take a picture. Hey, where am I at now? And it's one of my favorite comment I heard was, well, when you decide to come back to Wyoming, let us know. And that is absolutely accurate.
Yeah, I saw the picture you put up there. Riverton to the left, Du Bois to the right, and saw a lot of comments on there. That's fun. Maybe when we're traveling, we'll have to do that more. But yeah, I can agree. I've been up to Teton a couple of times and in the People's Republic of Jackson's Hole. And it is a strange, being from California, you think I'd be, used to that, saying, okay, I know, here's the freaks. But no, it is completely different than any other freak show I've ever seen in my life. But that notwithstanding, I guess there was a specific, event going on up there. I didn't know too much about it until the other day, but the Wyoming Caucus finally decided to debate the Freedom Caucus at, I guess, what they're calling a town hall in Teton County.
Well, kind of. So it was a town hall that was put on by a women's group in Jackson. And what they were trying to determine is, why is there a split in the Republican Party in Wyoming? And so, and without mentioning any names, this town hall was set up. And I thought it was going to be a debate, but it turned out to be more of a, let's hear what this group has to say. Let's hear what the other group has to say. So how it worked is the Redcoats got 20 minutes, and then they kind of had a break. And then the Freedom Caucus got 20 minutes, but the two didn't get to hear what the other was saying, which I thought was kind of inventive. The interesting part about it, Joey, though, is nobody knew I was coming. And so I walked through the front door, and I'm met by Poisonberry Craigo and Drag Show Clark standing right there. And the very first thing that Clark said to me was, "You're not recording this, are you?" And I said, well, I did bring a 4K camera, and I was asked to, record this whole thing so that there's a copy of it. And immediately, him and Poisonberry go on the defense. Well, we thought this was going to be off the record, and we didn't hear anything about recording. And Lynn Freeze, who was there, who is the widow of Foster Freeze, she turned around. She goes, well, I really wanted this to be sort of off the cuff, so I'd rather you not record it. And I mean, it's her event, right? So I said, well, I guess if you're against transparency, then okay. So,
yeah.
So I got to be there, listen to everything, but I took a copious amount of notes. And, one of them, it's amazing when you have a journalist in there and they know that whatever they say is going to get reported, how they change things, how they, kind of do their lawyerly rhetoric around it. And that's exactly what happened. It was an interesting experience.
And that's interesting to me. I don't know what this group is or who is involved in it, but to say we're going to have legislators that aren't from this area come and talk to other legislators that aren't from this area and discuss an issue that is really at the forefront of Wyoming politics right now in a public setting. I'm assuming it's a forum. They invited more people than just the speakers. And I didn't see any advertisements, so they didn't really tell anybody that this was happening. Otherwise, it probably would have come across my desk. But as soon as you get there, it's no, we want the people to be informed about what's going on, but only the people in this room with no evidence of this ever happening. That's, in my mind, regardless of what side of the aisle you're on, that's just not how it should work. And not just, to the benefit of we, the media, but to the people. There's people that can't and won't go to Jackson, Wyoming. There's people that couldn't, in the middle of a work day, get to this event. And you would think if your real interest was getting answers to these questions, you'd want to have evidence of the answers to these questions to help further inform the larger public. I'm not going to say there was any malicious intent behind it, but it just doesn't make sense to me. Why put the effort into putting on an event like that when you don't want the content of that event getting out? Just do what the Redcoats normally do. Have a private closed door meeting, charge $500 a seat, and tell the rest of us that we can't be there.
Yeah, it's, I didn't ask this question, and I didn't really talk to too many of the people that were there, aside from just sort of, general, hey, how do you think this is going? Bah, I'm David from Cowboy State Politics. Okay. But I didn't really ask too many questions of the people that were there, but I kind of took it as, maybe there were some, potential fundraising that was going on and people that may be, considering donating to one side or the other. So I don't know. All I can tell you is I was told I couldn't record it, which that's fine. I am able to take really good notes, and just so happens I've got a couple of what I'm pretty sure are exact quotations from that meeting. So I thought for today, and of course your interview, but there's one in particular that I think you'll find very, very interesting, Joey. So let's see here. From Barry Crago, he says, quote, policy-wise, there's really no difference between the two groups. We align on most things. And then he gives a list. And that list is abortion, guns and the Second Amendment, school choice, lower taxes, local control, and smaller government. So did you know that they all agree on that, Joey?
Yeah. I would love to see some evidence of that. I don't see the voting record backing any of that up, especially when you have the Wyoming Caucus in such a tight circle around all of their votes, almost as if they're voting in lockstep based on a text message they're receiving from Coach Harshman or something. And then the conservatives are all way up and to the right of them, but spread out. So if that statement were true, then it would just be one big red blob in the middle of the voting, not necessarily rankings, but the data for the specific votes across the legislative session. So I'm going to say statistically and factually, that doesn't bear out in the actions. Now, they may feel that way, but we're not going to get into how I deal with feelings. They don't legislate in that manner. No. Whatever he just said, there is nothing to back that up other than more speeches on the floor saying, no, I really agree with. It's like when they're standing on the floor and, two mortal enemies are talking to each other without talking to each other on the floor of the legislature saying, well, my good friend over here they're not good friends. It's just words coming out of their mouth to get through whatever genteel nature and tradition of the chamber that they have to deal with. So we can get into each of these subjects. And I know I'm doing a really bad job interviewing you, but you were there and you just stated they said they align on most things. And this is from the Wyoming Caucus side. Barry Crago said it. Let's just start with abortion. Where do the Redcoats and the conservatives truly line up together when it comes to abortion, considering the amount of arguments and bills that are amended that come across the board related to abortion that have to change to soften these types of actions when the Wyoming Caucus is involved?
Well, abortion is one of those topics that even the Redcoats know that if they are not, voting in favor of more restrictions on abortion, that is, killing babies, it's going to be a real negative with their constituents. And so abortion is one of those topics that they have to kind of hide around. They can't come out and say, if there's a bill that, for example, House Bill 152, the Life is a Human Right Act, they wouldn't come out and say and vote against it. That's a bridge way too far for them. But what they do try to do is weaken the bill. And it's classic Redcoat, legislating tactics that they pass a bill that sounds good, but really does very little. And so when the Life is a Human Right Act was up in the legislature, Barry Crago sponsored an amendment that literally would, wow, that was weird, that would have literally took all of the teeth out of the bill. And what it did was create a trigger bill out of the abortion ban. So it said, essentially, without quoting the exact verbiage of the amendment because it's really convoluted, but basically it said if the abortion ban that was already tied up in court, which was the original trigger bill, and I know this is getting confusing, but the original bill that everybody sued over said that if Roe v. Wade was overturned, then basically abortion was outlawed in Wyoming, with those three exceptions that we always talk about. So then the following year, Representative Rachel Rodriguez Williams brought House Bill 152, the Life is a Human Right Act. And that would have further restricted abortion. It was a much better bill. It is a much better bill. And it would have created a lot of different things that the original trigger bill didn't do. Okay, so Barry Crago was the author of an amendment on that bill that would have turned it into another trigger bill that basically said if the Supreme Court outlaws or overturns the original bill, then this one would come into effect. But it wouldn't do anything unless that happened. So essentially, he was voting against further restricting abortion, and he authored the amendment to do it. So the voting on that is really interesting. Now remember, according to Poison Barry Crago, the Wyoming Caucus is, they generally agree on abortion. Well, let me just read you the list of Wyoming Caucus members that was in favor of Barry's amendment that gutted House Bill 152, which is the Life is a Human Right Act. And all of the Redcoats are in there. Berger, Brown, Burkhart, Crago, Stith. Oh, Stith was also at that meeting in Jackson. Sandbags, Newsom, Martha Lawley, David Northrup, Ember Oakley, Jerry Obermueller, Kevin O'Hearn, Jared Olson. So all of the Redcoats voted in favor of gutting House Bill 152. So, and the people that voted against that amendment, that was the Freedom Caucus. All of them. And all of the conservatives. So, no, the Wyoming Caucus and the Freedom Caucus do not agree on abortion. One of us thinks that maybe it's a bad thing that we kill babies. The other one tries to weaken any restriction whatsoever on abortion simply because that is what really aligns with their Democrat values. And here is evidence. It's on the WyoLedge website. They're the ones that always say, if you want to know how we vote, go to wyoledge.gov. Okay, I encourage you to do that. And after we do this show, Joey, I'm going to be doing a lot of screenshotting and putting all these things online just so everybody can see that what Barry Crago said yesterday is not true at all.
Yeah, I think there's plenty of evidence to back that up. And I'm probably going to use the same point at the end of each of these topics. And I'll get to that here in a second. But the reason why they don't mind pointing you to WyoLedge is because they think you're dumb and lazy and you're just going to look at the final vote on third reading. Oh, I voted for that. Yeah, after spending 2.5 days trying to gut it, kill it, send it to a committee for it to die, all these other actions, you weren't really in support of it. So really with Barry Crago's statement that we, both caucuses, agree on these things, we're not looking for agreement. We're looking for action. I can sit there and feel something all day long, but if I'm not willing to get up off my dead butt, defend it, fight for it, maintain it myself, then it doesn't matter what I feel. And these are our legislators, so they're out there representing and taking these actions in our voice. And the example I'm going to give probably on all of these is if the members of the Wyoming Caucus and the Redcoats cared so much about abortion and agree with the Freedom Caucus, then why did they not defend the votes on House Bill 148 by calling a special session to overturn the governor's veto? You didn't care enough. You don't really agree. You were happy that somebody else killed it and you didn't have to take responsibility for it. If you really agreed with the Freedom Caucus, then that vote for special session to make sure that, and 148 wasn't necessarily an abortion ban. 148 said, while we're waiting for the answer on our abortion ban, we need to regulate the abortions that are happening to make sure that there's safety and oversight. No. We can't go back and defend that work. So I think we're going to see a lot of this distinction between the two groups based on action and follow-up, not just what they say they agree on or believe.
Yeah, and the attitude they had in that meeting yesterday, it really was everybody's friends. We all agree on everything. It's all sunshine and lollipops and unicorns. I mean, they were very, very, very light on any specifics whatsoever. And we'll get to another one. And when we get through the list, if we have time, I'll give you another example of what I'm talking about. There was only one bill that the Redcoats talked about in specifics. I mean, they mentioned a lot of other ones, but there was only one where Barry went through what he wanted them to believe were the actions taken on the bill. But other than that, it was just general feelings and, we're all a bunch of friends, my good friends on the other side. And, it was amazing. And Joey, I forgot to mention one thing when we started this. I want to say thank you to Lynn Freeze for inviting me to this event. There was no other media there, so I am very, very, very appreciative for her, agreeing to let me come in and watch this whole thing. And, I wish it would have been public. I wish I could have recorded it because I think there were some very important things that were said. But that being said, I am very appreciative for Mrs. Freeze letting me attend the meeting. So I just wanted to get that out of the way. And, I don't want anybody to think that I wasn't appreciative. So the next thing on their list, Joey, is guns. Do you think that the Redcoats, the Wyoming Caucus, and the conservatives agree on the topic of guns?
If we're talking about being an avid hunter and a gun collector and a concealed weapon permit holder, sure, because that's all the Redcoats ever use is their support. And that none of that has to do with the Second Amendment. Again, I'm going to go back to let's look at their arguments, their amendments, and their actual votes on gun bills. And we had a few this year that have passed. House Bill 125 came through the legislative side, House Bill 109. But there was also, some debate on certain gun bills that, regardless of how they voted in the end, they did everything they could to boysenberry any of these bills. Sometimes they did it with regulation. Sometimes they did it with appropriations. But there were active efforts. If you're in support of the Second Amendment and believe that shall not be infringed, you fight in that belief and avoid any government overreach into infringing on that right. And in a lot of these cases, we didn't see that from the Wyoming Caucus. We got the final vote in favor of the bill, but there was not a concerted effort to make sure that liberty and the biggest thing I have is the avoiding the list creation by the government was really a priority of the Wyoming Caucus. But apparently they agree with the Freedom Caucus on all this stuff. It just didn't bear out in the action.
Yeah, well, according to old Poisonberry, they are in lockstep with the Second Amendment. And this is the interesting thing about this for me, Joey. I know for a fact that Barry Crago has a closet full of guns at his house. He has worked the original Second Amendment Protection Act. I spent 2 hours on the phone with Barry Crago, walking through that thing line by line, making sure there was nothing to vote against on that. So the interesting thing about it, that was his first year in the legislature. Well, now that he's been in there for 2 terms, things have changed a little bit. And the debate that Joey was talking about on the floor was concerning Senate File 109, which was the ban red flag gun seizures or repeal red flag laws or whatever the title is. And there were, on the floor, on third reading, there were either 6 or 7 amendments that Bob Nicholas tried to put on the bill. One of them was just to remove the legislative findings. That's his big thing in the legislature. He doesn't want the Supreme Court or any other court that might evaluate that law to be able to look at the legislature's intent. I think it's stupid. There's lots of laws in our green books that have the findings in there, what the intent of the legislature was. But the First Amendment that passed removed the legislative findings. But that didn't really do anything to the substance of the bill. Okay, all right, so the reasoning isn't there, but the statute still is. So I would prefer that those findings be in there, but okay, whatever. It doesn't really harm the substance of the bill. So the other amendments, any one of them would have gutted Senate File 109. And if you look at the roll call sheets, and when Dan Zwanitzer was complaining about weaponizing transparency by calling for roll call votes, this is what he was talking about. The conservatives and the Freedom Caucus called for a roll call vote on every single one of those amendments because any one of them would have gutted the whole bill. And if you look at the entire Wyoming Caucus, every single one of them, with the exception of, and this is crazy to me, with the exception of Cyrus Western, all of them voted for at least one of those bills. So what I'm going to do, and I'm going to have to spend some time on my computer today putting together the amendments with the roll call vote and throwing it on the website so you can see exactly what they were voting for. But here's one of them. Let's see here. This was third reading amendment number 2. Whoops, there's Barry Crago voting for it, and Clark Stith, and a couple of others. I mean, let's see here. Tony Nemick, David Northrup, Ember Oakley, Jerry Obermuller, Kevin O'Hearn, Jared Olson, Lane Allred, Don Burkhart, your pal down there in Carbon County. But, a whole bunch of them voted for that one. Oh, wait, And here is Amendment number 3, or third reading Amendment number 3. Let's see here. We've got Andrew Byron, Forrest Chadwick, Ken Chestic is a Democrat, Bob Nicholas, Jerry Obermuller, Kevin O'Hearn, so more of the Redcoats. Here's Amendment number 4. Chadwick, Chestic, Clouston, Conrad. Let's see here. Oh, Stith voted for this one too. Oh, wait, let's see here. Here's Amendment number 5. And by this time, and you have to understand how these Redcoats work. They'll stack up all these amendments, and when it becomes obvious that the amendment is not going to pass, then they all start to get on board and they start voting against it. So you'll see kind of diminishing returns as far as the Redcoats go in who's voting for it. But on Amendment number 5, you've still got members of the Wyoming Caucus voting for it. Obermuller, O'Hearn, let's see here. Who else? Bob Nicholas, Bill Henderson. And so there's a couple on that one. Oh, let's see here. And then there's Amendment number 6. This one was at the end, but you still had Obermuller and Henderson and Nicholas and Dave Zwanitzer. We haven't mentioned him yet. They voted for it. And the list goes on and on. So the truth is that when they have a chance to gut a bill, just like they did with the abortion bill, they vote for it. And again, you can look at any one of those amendments, and you can see that pretty much all of them voted for at least one of these amendments to gut Senate File 109 and make it entirely useless. So no, they don't agree on guns. Now, by the way, on all of those, the conservatives and the Freedom Caucus voted against them. So here's at least 5 or 6 examples of where they don't agree on guns, Barry Crago.
Yeah, and again, it goes back to it bears out in the action, not in the stump speeches or the I want to look good for this group rhetoric. And I'll point back to if you really did agree with the Freedom Caucus or the Constitution on the Second Amendment, then you would have been all over calling that special session to go and defend your work that you say you believe in and agree with the Freedom Caucus and the conservatives on when the governor vetoed those. But that wasn't the case at all. In fact, there's a list of reasons why they didn't want to have special session that had nothing to do with the content of a lot of these bills. I think they actively avoided that. And they kind of pigeonholed themselves because when that email from Cale Case came out and said, is anybody thinking special session over this Wolf situation? They would have to find a way to get around all their arguments for not having the earlier special session, which again had nothing to do with the content of the bills. They'd have to get over the, oh, we're on vacation and we have families constraint, or the it's going to cost too much money constraint. So this is what happens when you play games and I'm going to say it, come out and lie or legislate as a liar. I know if a politician's lips are moving, they're lying. But when Barry Crago says this stuff, but all the other actions and inactions bear out the fact that it's not true, plus they have locked themselves into a place where they can't act or they have to prove their hypocrisy. It shows that it's more of a game for them than it is representing the people with a true sense of liberty and principle. And I'm sure that's going to be the example throughout the rest of this list, which I believe also includes school choice. Now, we had a couple of ESA bills this year, I believe, but really, I don't know that a lot of them or a lot of the portions of it got it done, but one of them did pass. I know Clark Stith was really big on school choice and parental rights, but in bills that really didn't have anything to do with legitimate school choice and parental rights. You got anything on those bills that they worked on, or you just want to spitball off the top of your head?
Okay, so the school choice, ESA bills, whatever you want to call them, this one is another example where you kind of have to get down in the weeds a little bit and figure out whether or not the Wyoming Caucus and the conservatives agree on this one. Now, one of the bills that Clark Stith brought up in the meeting was House Bill 19. That was Albert Somers' take on education savings accounts. Now, a lot of it was pretty much in line with the ESA bill that the conservatives had brought the previous year. There were some changes to it that you would expect, more spending, those sorts of things. But the big thing on it was universal pre-K, which was expanding Wyoming government spending to pre-kindergarten or preschool. Now, that's been a darling of the Democrats for a very, very, very long time. And the reason that the national Democrats want it is, hey, man, if we can get them in earlier and start indoctrinating them when they're 4 and 5 and 6 years old, we should do that. So that was the big thing on that one, that it vastly expanded government spending, Wyoming state government spending, and it created a whole nother entitlement. So bigger government, more spending, and more indoctrination. The other part about this is that bill, in my opinion, is entirely unconstitutional. There's Article 3, Section 36. There's a couple more places in the Wyoming Constitution, one of which that always sticks out in my mind is that no money can be given to anyone by the state unless Wyoming, that is the state of Wyoming, is in absolute control of it. And that's the language that's used in the Wyoming Constitution, that you can't give any money out unless the state of Wyoming absolutely controls it. So if you're giving money out for a so-called education savings account, and it has to be in line with that provision in the Constitution, then the state has to control it. So really, you're shuffling homeschooling and charter schools and all of that. If they take government money, it's under the control of the state. So in other words, it completely switches around the whole idea of school choice and puts the state of Wyoming in charge of it. So while there were some conservatives that were in favor of education savings accounts, the reason why they killed House Bill 19, which is the one that Clark brought up in that meeting, is because of that universal pre-K, because it's a brand new entitlement. It's vastly expanding government. It's a tremendous increase in spending. So in that case, Clark, no, you don't agree with the Wyoming or with the Freedom Caucus or with the conservatives in the House. As far as the voting goes, that one is one instance where the votes were kind of all over the place. And there's another one down here when we get to taxes. But no, the Wyoming Caucus does not agree with the Freedom Caucus on education, nor do they agree on spending. Another example of where these two groups don't agree is with the massive amount of money that Wyoming puts towards K through 12 education. At every turn, the Wyoming Caucus is trying to get some sort of handle on our outrageous spending. Wyoming is either number 1 or number 2 in the amount of money that we spend per student, and I don't know what it's going to come to this year, but last year it was $19,700 per student. Now, the return on investment on that is mediocre test scores. Wyoming is almost dead in the middle in the United States as far as our student achievement. So we spend the most for mediocre results. And again, that's one of the places where the Wyoming Caucus does not agree with the conservatives on this. They want to spend way more money. They want way more government control. The conservatives, on the other hand, they want to get a handle on the spending and maybe look at things like states like South Dakota do. South Dakota spends $9,000 per student, and they rank higher than Wyoming does. So, no, they don't agree.
Well, that would make sense as to why there's a push to lower the graduation standards in Wyoming, because they also have a dismal graduation rate. I think it's almost an eighth of Wyoming high school students do not graduate from high school, not because they drop out necessarily. They just don't pass the test. They don't have the education to get that diploma at the end.
We'll finish up with all of the reasons why the Redcoats weren't telling the truth in Jackson in just a moment. But first, an absolutely outrageous profit timeout. I mean, come on. Somebody's got to pay for that little adventure down in Jackson. This special presentation of Cowboy State Politics is brought to you by Rebecca Bextel at Compass Real Estate. Are you one of those people who's finally had enough communism in California and you've decided to move to a place where real freedom exists, like Wyoming? Well, if you've made that wise decision, you need a real estate agent that you can trust. That agent is Rebecca Bextel at Compass Real Estate. She's lived in Jackson for almost 20 years, and she's got her fingers on the pulse of the real estate market. Give her a call. Her phone number is 307-699-3519. Now, if you live in Jackson and you've decided that you want to sell out and actually move to Wyoming, Rebecca can help you there too. Give her a call. One more time, her phone number is 307-699-3519. Nick and Jesse at Morton Buildings are the two guys you need to talk to if you've been thinking about any type of building for your property, whether it's a garage or a barn or maybe something bigger like a roping arena, or even if you need a giant warehouse for your business. The two guys you need to talk to are Nick and Jesse. Their phone number is 307-674-2532. You'll receive a 50-year warranty on the foundation, which is something that you're not going to get from any of their competitors. One cool thing that they do is they pour concrete pillars and then insert a steel beam inside them and then pour the foundation on top. That way, there is absolutely no possibility of water getting underneath the foundation and ruining your building. Give Nick and Jesse a call at 307-674-2532, or you can check them out at their website, mortonbuildings.com. If you'd like to become a sponsor of Cowboy State Politics, shoot me an email. The address is david@cowboystatepolitics.com. I would love to get that conversation started with you. Nobody beats my advertising rates, and I have a statewide platform that is sure to get your message out. So if you want to help sponsor the program, definitely shoot me an email. Again, my address is david@cowboystatepolitics.com. And now, back to all the whoppers that Barry and Clark said down in Jackson.
But it's also interesting that Clark Stith made that argument about House Bill 19 and wanting to have universal pre-K, because I believe on the list you mentioned at the beginning, one of their last comments, and we'll get into this more when it comes up, but is smaller government. So this is what I do. I find the contradiction in the statements themselves. So if you were for this bill and education savings account included taxpayer-funded daycare, I call it what it is, with an indoctrination hook in it, how are you legitimizing your later statement of we're for smaller government when almost every action you do expands government, either in spending or the physical expansion through new departments, new programs, stuff like that? So I'm going to go ahead and call BS on that one. And that kind of leads us into, because of the cost of schools and how we spend, they say they agree with the Freedom Caucus agrees with, the Wyoming Caucus agrees with the Freedom Caucus on lower taxes. But with all this spending and expansion, we haven't seen anything to lower taxes. Now, we've seen a few bills to provide rebates or discounts on property tax that it's already been assessed. We can't not do the property tax assessment. It's in the Constitution. But we haven't even seen lowering of taxes being, an option in any of this, because we also haven't seen a major discussion about, at least from the Wyoming Caucus, a reduction in spending, which is directly related to the rate in which we tax the citizens of Wyoming. So I don't know exactly what conversation they had about lowering taxes, but we've got about a million examples, I'm sure. And there's a reason why Barry Crago's nickname is Poison Barry. And every time he adds an amendment to any bill, that I think it's everywhere between 800,000 and 8 million on any given bill.
800 million.
Oh, 800 million.
Yes.
That would result in at least the maintaining, if not the increasing, of the current tax rate. So why don't you give us the example they gave, and maybe we can tear that apart a little.
No problem. Of course, their trophy that they're putting on their wall is House Bill 45. And it's interesting that, Barry starts out saying, we agree with lower taxes. And the example they use is House Bill 45. House Bill 45 doesn't lower your taxes. It's a reduction in the increase in your taxes. So from now on, your taxes can only go up 4%. Well, that kind of means that they didn't go down. Essentially, they put into law a mandate that your taxes will go up 4% every year. Now, this one is another one where there were votes on either side. And in the Freedom Caucus portion of the town hall, John Baer did a really good job explaining this, saying that, look, one of the problems we're facing is we're seeing dramatic increases in property taxes. So we want to do two things. One, stop the increases in property taxes, but two, lower them. Make sure that you pay less taxes. And John Baer and Chip Nyman was also there, and they repeatedly said, look, in the past few years, your taxes have gone up 62%. And that's an average statewide, but a 62% increase in just a couple of years. So House Bill 45 did kind of tackle the whole increase in spending thing, but it also guaranteed that in probably 15 or 16 years, your taxes are going to double. That's not reducing taxes whatsoever. And let me give you one more example where they don't agree on lowering your taxes. 3 amendments to the budget brought by Representative Mark Jennings, and they literally, it started out, and it would lower your taxes about $380. But Representative Jennings wanted to spend $180 million and just buy down the mills across the board for every single county. So it would have been an across-the-board tax cut. All of the Redcoats voted against it. So then Representative Jennings says, well, you didn't like $180 million. Maybe you'd like $90. So he cut it in half. Same result. All of the conservatives voted for it. All of the Redcoats and the Wyoming Caucus voted against it. And so Mark Jennings, being kind of hard-headed in this area, he thinks that maybe we should have lower taxes, said, okay, well, you didn't like $80 million. Let's try $40. So $40 million, which would have resulted in a reduction in your taxes of about $80. $80 is all that would do. And the Wyoming Caucus voted against it, and all of the conservatives, including the Freedom Caucus, voted for it. So don't tell me, Barry Crago, that you guys agree with lowering taxes. Like you said, Joey, if you're not going to reduce spending, you're not interested in lowering taxes. All that means is you're going to find another way to steal more money out of people's pockets. And so House Bill 45, and it's fascinating that they use that example and they tried to float that over as a tax decrease. It absolutely amazing that they think that the people in those two rooms were that stupid to believe them. And I can guarantee you that, I know a few of the people that were there, and of course I'm not going to mention any names, but they're not stupid. And you could tell by the questions afterwards that, everybody was nice and everybody was, had their pinkies out while they were drinking tea, the genteel nature. But you could tell that a lot of the arguments coming out of Clark Stith and Barry Crago weren't going anywhere. So no, they don't agree on taxes either.
Well, having the debate on taxes, especially property taxes in Teton County, with what the result of this session was, it's probably a hard sell because Teton County is the one that is worried the most about taxes because of their high value of property, let's just call it. They say they've been hit the hardest. I believe if the system is working properly, everybody's been hit at the same rate. The dollar amount in Teton County is just higher because, well, your property is worth more.
Right, exactly.
But it's not only interesting that they had that debate, but the point you made about Representative Jennings offering 3 different and cascading lower offers to just give ultimately people $80 of their property taxes back. Nowhere in that discussion was the spending, let's reduce spending to make this work. But often throughout that entire series of amendments, you heard the Wyoming Caucus say, we cannot lose this much revenue. Where are we going to backfill it from? So there's actually an argument against reducing spending of no, we have to maintain our spending. We can't give up that much money. We can't even talk about, the different sources that we'd have to pull money from in order to continue this money eating machine that we already created. So yeah, there's a difference between not talking about reducing spending and then actively advocating for the current level of spending you have being maintained while you don't reduce it. And another interesting thing about taxes, especially if we're talking about property taxes, if you look at any of the articles or listen to any of the shows that we put out here on the Independence Network about the special session, the one concession, the one plum that the Redcoats were willing to pluck on a special session was property taxes. But even that, they didn't agree with or believe in enough to vote for the special session, go in there and fight for the one thing they said or pretended or want to sell during their campaign as being important. So for me, a lot of this is going to continue to go back to how long, how hard did you fight for what you say you believe and agree with the Freedom Caucus on, because the special session would have allowed you to fight that one fight on that one bill that kind of would have brought most of this together. I don't think any of the property tax bills did it on their own. Collectively, there's still things that need to be done to actually address reform for property taxes. But if this is one of their issues, and it was the one that they would have talked about in special session, they gave it up. They failed the people of Wyoming by not voting to have that special session and go and override that governor's veto.
Yeah, you're exactly right. And one more note on, this whole lower taxes business. With House Bill 45, the Freedom Caucus and the conservatives, because, not all conservatives are members of the Freedom Caucus again, they tried to take our property taxes back to 2019 levels, which would have been pre-pandemic, and to a large extent, that was before all these gigantic increases in property taxes. So take everything back to 2019 levels, which, by the way, assessors could do that with the click of a button on their keyboard. The Redcoats claimed that was impossible. But anyway, so the Freedom Caucus tried to take that back to 2019 levels, and again, the Wyoming Caucus voted against it multiple times. There were several amendments to different measures this past session to try to do that very thing, and the Wyoming Caucus would have none of it. Not a single time were we able to have the discussion. Really have the discussion of going back to 2019 levels. So, no, they don't agree on lower taxes either.
Yeah, we're going to keep looking for evidence of action on any of these things that the Wyoming Caucus says they believe in. And here's one that I think they may have taken action on. It's a very vague term that they use, but I think they took action in the wrong way. They say they agree with the Wyoming Caucus, agrees with the Freedom Caucus on local control. Now, I do know that the Freedom Caucus believes local control and input is very important on a myriad of things. But the problem we're having with local control right now has to do with liberty.
Yes.
Firearms.
Yes, absolutely.
House Bill 125.
Yep.
And then another thing that I don't think local control should be, just piecemeal and patchwork across the state is when it comes to hypersexualizing our children through library materials. So, yeah, both groups may be in favor of local control, but I think they're very different on what they believe legitimate local control, especially when it comes to liberties and the proper role of government, is.
Absolutely. Well, the Wyoming Caucus typically votes for any type of government expansion. And when they talk about local control, what they mean is the legislature will completely open up everything and allow local municipalities to do whatever they want. But the truth is, there's a little thing called preemption that was passed. It was passed a long time ago, but last year they did a fix to it. That whatever the state legislature says, you can't have a municipal ordinance or a municipal code that contradicts anything that state law says. And, when it comes to firearms, what they really want is local school districts to be able to further regulate your Second Amendment rights. Joey and I could give you a list of a really long list of sound bites where they've said, no, school districts need to be able to, put whatever restrictions they want on your right to carry a concealed weapon. This whole idea of local control is one of those things that it's so nebulous that they're able to manipulate it in any way that they want. There really is no evidence whatsoever that the Wyoming Caucus is really in favor of your liberties. There's just no evidence of it, and their voting record proves it.
Yeah, and I would say, legitimate functions and responsibilities of the government, they concede that authority to a lower level. Uh, this department shall promulgate rules. This will be county commissioners or local municipality boards can vote on how certain things are controlled. But I want to make clear, not liberties,
Not
processes,
liberties.
procedures, regulations. Okay, liberties. No, I look at the Second Amendment quite often because I keep hearing statements and I make sure that they're not in the Second Amendment. And all I see is, shall not be infringed. There's no comma or footnote says except for by a local school district or city council board. It says shall not be infringed. And just last week I got my new copy of the concealed weapons permit for Wyoming, and I look on the back because they tend to put on the back all the verbiage of all the places you're not allowed to carry. And it used to be 5 things. And now there's no less than 11 different places that they say by this law or this statute or this fiat or this rule, you can't carry here, there, or anywhere. And it's starting to get to the point where, hey, you have to call it what it is. If you don't agree with the Second Amendment, which the Freedom Caucus normally does and defends pretty ardently, then you are not working on pro Second Amendment stuff. Everything you pass is a gun control measure. Whether you admit to it, agree with it, believe it or not, it is gun control. Now, do I think we need everybody running around schools with guns? No, but we've already got that covered. Whether you have a firearm on you or not, try to get into a school and see how that works for you. You're going to have to go through locked doors. You're going to have to talk to the secretary or whoever's up front. You're going to have to get a little pass. So the firearms issue isn't really the issue. We already have secured schools, and somebody who really wants to get on a campus, I mean, you've heard this argument 1,000 times. They're going to find a way. They're going to do their damage. I don't know. Maybe they'll be more successful if they grab a bow and arrow and try to do it. I've heard that works, but nonetheless, we have to talk about the fundamental principles of liberty when it comes to things like this, because the Wyoming Caucus is out there trying to garner votes saying, no, look, I did vote for that. We do support this in a reasonable, rational manner. What is it called? Common sense gun control. That's not their place. And it's definitely not their place to send it down to a local level so they can wash their hands of it and say, hey, then you need to vote for a better city council if you really want that stuff. No, we need to vote for a better legislator that will defend one of the few responsibilities of government is to protect liberty. And we just do not see that out of the Wyoming Caucus.
Nope. Well, one of the other things they mentioned was, we agree on smaller government. And I know, Joey, that you have got a list of places where the Wyoming Caucus does not agree with smaller government. And I mean, there's a big, long list. But one of the things that did come up in, I don't remember, I think it was the session with the Freedom Caucus yesterday, but it was mask and vaccine mandates. House Bill 66. Now, that's the bill that Jeanette Ward brought in, not this year, but this past the general session in 2023. And it would have banned mask and vaccine mandates in the state of Wyoming, pretty much across the board. And all of the Wyoming caucus voted against it, but not before that Barry Crago added the record for the biggest amendment ever in the Wyoming legislature at $847 million. And now he forgot to mention that little thing when he was talking about, agreeing with the Freedom Caucus. But the reason he put that on there is he claimed that the federal government was going to make us pay for all of Medicaid if we passed House Bill 66. And the truth is, at the time that bill was brought, 17 other states had already passed that exact same bill, and nothing had happened. That was Barry Crago, or dare I say, Poison Barry Crago's way of putting a poison pill into the bill so that nobody would vote for it. $847 million. And in the end, the Wyoming caucus voted against it. Now, that bill would have prevented the government in pretty much any form, or your employer, from enforcing a mask or vaccine mandate. And I mean, tremendously important. If you want to talk about big government, let's talk about them forcing you to jab a piece of metal into your arm. That is the pinnacle of big government right there. And I'm looking at the vote right now on my screen, and guess what? The entire Wyoming caucus voted for it, for that amendment, that is.
Yeah, I'm not surprised they did. That's why we call them poisonberry, and it goes to lower taxes. Yeah, great argument there when you just try to put $1 billion to kill something that had nothing to do with the bill itself. I'm going to push back a little bit on this bill. Um, I totally believe that this would have been completely valid and inarguable if they limited it to government resources, not only institutions of the government, but any business that takes government money, grants, loans, all that other stuff. But your small mom and pop shops, private businesses are private property. If they want to institute a policy, no shoes, no shirt, no service, our employees must have this, that, and the other. I don't think it should be a law. You can sue them based on discrimination as an individual. But you may, as inconvenient and unpalatable as it is, you might not want to work for that person. You might have to quit your job to defend your liberty. But anything having to do with government, absolutely. No, you cannot force these things on government. And if you do, it can only be on government. Again, money, strings attached. I get that argument. But the bottom line is the arguments that were made for or against this bill in certain areas with the Wyoming caucus completely went against most of the rest of the stuff they said. I'm not going to get too deep into pushing back hard on the bill itself. I just don't like the idea of the government telling private businesses what they can't do. I don't like the fact that there's certain local controls saying businesses can't allow people to smoke. Let them thrive or fail on their own merits based on how they want to run their business. But a quote from Clark Stith on this bill would have hampered business freedom and allowed government to insert itself in decisions being made by Wyoming business owners on how to best operate their business. I kind of agree with that. But in a follow-up, he said, it is the legislature's responsibility to serve as a steady barrier against government overreach. House Bill 66 defeat is a win for liberty and smaller government. I think that's what he's trying to talk about at your little meeting the other day, but I don't believe it does that. I don't believe it does that at all. It doesn't limit the government by killing this bill. It limits the conversations about liberty, the separation between the state and private industry. And it hasn't stopped anything from coming down the pike saying, I believe this, but when it comes to having a special session for masks and vaccines and shutdowns, we vote the other way because at the time it was just too scary to not do the other thing. So there's no consistency. There's no real avoiding government overreach. And as Barry Crago's arguments and amendment with an appropriation prove, it's all about the money, and they will use the money on both sides, either as a fear tactic or as a, the carrot on the stick of, well, we need to put this much money or we're going to get this much more money from the federal government. And so it's a little problematic, but none of it relates to actually arguing for smaller government, because if they were arguing for smaller government over on the Wyoming caucus side, they would have fought against things like, trying to set up our schools as mental health and medical centers. What else do we have? All the money for a city-owned tree zoo and some air shows, or the 988 hotline. All that stuff expanded government on the heels of the votes from the Wyoming caucus.
Couple of things. As it relates to House Bill 66, there's a big difference between your employer asking you to put on a uniform to wear to work and them telling you you have to take a shot. There's a lot of things that an employer can ask you to do, but putting something inside your body is not one of them. The entire argument during that special session was about business rights. Oh, we can't regulate small businesses. We can't tell them what to do to individuals. The question here is not a discussion over business rights versus the government's rights. It's about individual liberties. Article 1, Section 38 says you have the right to make your own health care decisions, which I believe would probably include taking a shot. Now, as it relates to government spending and bigger government, they're totally in the tank for more spending. If you go to Evidence-Based Wyoming and look at the article, I think it's titled, Who Are the Big Spenders in the Wyoming Legislature? It's clear, it's as plain as the nose on your face who's in favor of more government spending and who's not. And let me tell you, it is the Freedom Caucus who is in favor of reducing government spending, reducing the size of government. And they're all at the top of the list of people that spent the least amount of money, that is, voted for the least amount of government spending. And the Wyoming Caucus is on the bottom of the list with the voting to spend us into oblivion with every program they can think of. Joey mentioned tree zoos and air shows. Those are just two examples of where they wanted to dramatically increase the size of government. What about universal pre-K with their education savings account bill, creating a brand new entitlement, a government-funded daycare? I mean, there are so many examples in this past session of where the Freedom Caucus, or the Wyoming Caucus, rather, voted to dramatically increase the size of government, to insert themselves into more and more finite parts of your life. We're not talking about people who believe in individual liberties. And, this show could probably go on for 3 or 4 or 5 hours with us going through example after example after example. The truth is, they spent the House of Representatives, the Wyoming Caucus, spent $1 billion, $1.2 billion actually, more than the Senate. The reason why this year's budget went up so dramatically is literally because of the Wyoming Caucus. They are the people that were in charge of the Appropriations Committee. So there is no possible way that Clark Stith or Poisonberry Crago can make the argument that they're in favor of smaller government. It is just not possible. And if you add in all of the other things that we talked about this morning, whether it's House Bill 152 or it's guns or it's school choice or lower taxes, all of those relate to increasing the size of government, increasing government power over your individual liberties. And, we just gave you, let's see here, on my list, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 different items to where the Wyoming Caucus dramatically increased the influence of government over your personal life. And, so Barry Crago and Clark Stith can say anything they want, but the truth is their votes, the reality of what they do and what they vote for and who they are is a very, very, very different thing.
And before we shove off for the day, who they are is the big deal. Remember, with all this increased spending and more proof that the Wyoming Caucus doesn't agree with the Freedom Caucus on a lot of these things, remember what Barry Crago tried to do during the session. He said, here's our budget. It's a massive increase. But if you don't vote for the budget, he tried to pass an amendment or bring an amendment that said any individual legislator that votes against the budget shall have their entire district or county defunded. You're not getting any of this money. So basically what he said is, if you don't agree with us, then we're going to take your county's money. That's not agreeing on policy. That's saying you better or else, which was also backed up by Governor Mark Gordon when he line item vetoed the Wheatland Water Tower bill. This forceful retribution is not agreement, and putting somebody bringing them to a situation saying, you need to come to our side, otherwise you're the bad guy. That is a Wyoming Caucus tactic. We have evidence of it in writing, and it doesn't constitute agreeing on fundamental issues. Thank you, Barry Crago, for proving your hypocrisy.
Absolutely. This is the icing on the cake, my friends. It is House Bill 1, third reading amendment number 61, and it is straight up extortion. That if you don't vote for the budget, your county gets nothing. That's essentially what the amendment says. Now, he withdrew it after it was explained to him by the Legislative Service Office that this is absolutely unconstitutional because it fits into about a half a dozen references to bribery and extortion in the Wyoming Constitution. So if you'd like to know, who is fighting for your individual freedoms and your liberties, your rights, those things, it is not the Wyoming Caucus. Now, again, I'm going to publish this episode on Cowboy State Politics this morning. It's going to take me a little time, but I'm going to put together all the documentation that you need, different links. All you have to do is go to cowboystatepolitics.com on the show content page, and there'll be a long list of all of the documentation that we talked about today. The truth is, It doesn't matter if the Wyoming Caucus goes to Jackson or to Cheyenne, Hewlett, Sheridan, or down to Carbon County. There's still a bunch of Democrats that can't spell. That'll do it for this special presentation of Cowboy State Politics. Thanks for listening. From the base of the Bighorns, at the Cowboy State Politics Studio in Sheridan, Wyoming, I'm David Iverson, and this is the one and only Cowboy State Politics.